Okay, on to part 2 of Rawls. In this presentation, we're going to look at his 2 specific principles of justice. So if you recall, during the first presentation, we were looking at his veil of ignorance and the hypothetical situation, or the original position. This is a situation in which we decide on principles of justice. Well, the second component of Rawls' political thought is the 2 principles of justice he thinks people would actually agree on. Now, these are separate. You can have these principles without having the crazy veil of ignorance, and you can have the veil of ignorance without maybe leading to these principles. But they're both important. So today we're going to look at this. All right, let's do another thought experiment. Suppose one day you're out minding your business and you end up getting kidnapped by your arch enemy. Upon being captured by your arch enemy, your enemy tells you that he or she is going to lock you in a cryogenic chamber for 1,000 years. Upon being unfrozen in the year 3012 AD or 3013 AD, your enemy will allow you to choose between one of 3 futuristic societies that exist on Earth. So, most of you probably don't have arch enemies, but if you did, you would hope your arch enemy would be benevolent enough to let you choose at least what society you live in. Still doesn't change the fact that your arch enemy has frozen you for 1,000 years. So much for your family and friends. Okay, here's your arch enemy, Jabba the Hutt. And you are Han Solo, and there you are, frozen in carbonite for 1,000 years. Okay, all that you're going to know about these societies that your arch enemy will let you decide is the following. 1. Each society has 3 classes. 2. Each society's classes' social goods have a definite numerical quantity. The higher the quantity of the class, the higher amount of social goods the class typically has, although there will be one exception we'll see soon. 3. Social goods include access to education, money, healthcare, leisure activities such as vacations, and so on. Okay, so that's what you know. You have to pick the society. That's what your enemies are going to let you pick. Being somewhat benevolent, as I mentioned, your archenemy will at least let you pick what society you'll end up in. However, once you pick the society, your enemy will assign your social class, and you're trapped in that class for the rest of your life. Okay, so this is kind of like a mixture of Return of the Jedi and Futurama, I just realized. Regardless. So we're going to call this a societal matrix. This is the breakdown of the 3 societies and the 3 classes in each society. Okay. And recall, you get to choose the society, and then your enemy chooses the class. Alright, Society 1, all 3 classes have the same amount of social goods, equal across the board. Society 2, there's inequalities. Class 1, you gotta get the shaft there. Class 3, you're doing pretty good. Class 2 is not doing too shabby either. And then Society 3, also inequality, but it doesn't appear that Class 1 gets the shaft. And while Class 2 and 3 are doing pretty well, they're not doing as well as they were in Society 2. Okay, I'm going to elaborate on what the social goods are in each class in a few slides. So we'll start with Society 1. Recall, Society 1, all 3 classes have the same amount of social goods. Okay, 33.3 across the board. This is an egalitarian society. Everyone has the same social position and all the public goods that are associated with that social position. It's not a particularly high social position, but at least everyone's equal, so you know no one's better or worse off than you. And further, if you select Society 1, it wouldn't matter which class your enemy assigned to you, as all 3 classes are equal in social position and social goods. Okay. So to illustrate, everyone in Society 1, regardless of class, lives in a house like that. Just to illustrate the equality of social goods, because housing is a social good. Okay, back to the societal matrix. That's Society 1. Society 2, recall, is almost the exact opposite, radical inequalities. Society 2 is non-egalitarian. There's a huge discrepancy between classes 1 and 3. You'll notice 17 and 109. Further, Class 1 in Society 2 has half the social position and all the goods associated with it than Class 1 in Society 1. So once again, if you get Class 1 in Society 2, you're going to have half the goods that you get in Society 1. Classes 2 and 3 are much better off. Class 2 has almost 150% the social position that had in Society 1, and Class 3 has 333%. So if you selected Society 2, you would hope that your archenemy decided that you were in Classes 2 or 3, and you would dread being assigned Class 1. Again, that's if you selected Society 2. Alright, so to illustrate Class 1, living in slums, begging, because it's just those are your social goods. Class 2, the Bundys, sitcom from the 80s and early 90s. Lower middle class, kind of mundane existence. And then Class 3, yeah, you're Hugh Hefner or Donald Trump. And I picked like two rich guys that, did they really deserve their wealth? Okay. Again, the societal matrix. The one thing we haven't looked at yet is Society 3. Again, 3 classes, 37, 43, and 72. So Society 3 is also non-egalitarian. However, Class 3 is not that far from Class 1 or 2 in Society 3. Further, the social position of Class 1 in Society 3 is actually double that of it in Society 2 and a lot higher than it is in Society 1. Class 2 is a little bit lower in Society 3 than Class 2, but a lot higher. I'm not going to read this stuff, but just take a look at it. Class 1 in Society 3 is better off than Class 1 in Societies 1 and 2. Double Society 2, and a fair amount higher than Society 1. Further, it's not that far off from Class 2. It's only a little bit lower, and while Class 3 is double that of Class 1, it's still much less inequalities than, say, between Class 1 and Society 2. So sure, there's inequality, but... So here's the question I always ask. Well, here, one more illustration. Class 1's not doing too bad. There's their house. Class 3 is doing really well. And then Class 2 would be like Full House. If you ever watch that show, look at their house. It's not bad living life at all. So I always get to this point. What society would you pick? Quick poll question. Your archenemy is presented with the societal matrix. You pick the society, your archenemy picks the class. Which society would you pick? I always ask my students, and I always get the same answer. Society 3. Why would most people pick Society 3? Well, because the worst off in Society 3 are better off than the worst off in Societies 1 and 2. That's generally why they pick Society 3, because you can assume that your enemy will give you the worst class, Class 1. But at the same time, the worst off in Society 3 is better off than the worst off in the other two. It's the best case scenario for the worst off, I guess. Okay. This is what John Rawls calls the maximize the minimum strategy, or the maximin. It's a rule of choice that directs us to play it as safe as possible by choosing the alternative whose worst outcome leaves us better off than the worst outcome of other alternatives. Okay, so it's the best worst case scenario, basically. This is the strategy. You're going to pick the best worst case scenario. So Rawls argues that the principles of regulating inequalities agreed to from the original position behind the veil of ignorance would follow the maximin rule. So if you're behind the veil of ignorance in the original position, you'd go by the maximin rule. You try to organize a society in which the worst off are better off than the worst off in other ways of organizing the society. Because you might end up, once the veil is lifted, being worst off in the lowest class. Okay, so given that we don't necessarily want a complete equality of social goods, so remember, so I guess Society 1 would be like Marxism. Complete equality across the board. But suppose we also don't want to be deprived of many important goods. So suppose laissez-faire capitalism, free market capitalism, leaves the worst off oftentimes in a really bad position. So we don't want complete equality, but we don't want the kind of situations you get with inequality where the worst off are really bad off. Instead, you want a distribution of goods. So instead of distribution of goods that follows the maximin principle is what, according to Rawls, free, equal, and rational participants in the original position would agree to. So he writes, so not he, but in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, they write, the principles of distributive justice are normative, you should know what that means, principles designed to guide the allocation of the benefits and burdens of economic activity. So distributive justice is basically how do you distribute resources. The justice of distribution of resources. Some people say it should be done completely equally. Others say there should be inequalities. But if you're going to have inequalities, you got to have a principled way to distribute it. And that's what distributive justice kind of studies. And Rawls has got his own proposals. So throughout most of the 20th century, we thought there were just two ways you could distribute inequalities. One, strict egalitarianism. The Marxist view, it advocates the equal distribution of material goods to all members of society. And then on the other side, there's like the free market view, where it's just there's inequalities. And then there's Rawls' kind of middle position, which is his difference principle. And this is allocation doesn't need to conform to strict equality as long as the inequality has the effect that the least advantaged in society are materially better off than they would be under strict equality. And recall, society 3, the worst off are better off than they are in the strict equality situation. And I picked that up for a reason. Okay. Here's a real life example. So you all familiar with Ben & Jerry's ice cream chain? They make delicious ice cream. Okay. They, for a long time... Okay, my clothes are dry. For a long time, Ben & Jerry's had this corporate policy called the 7-to-1 ratio policy. That was no employee's rate of pay should exceed 7 times that of entry-level employees. So if the lowest hourly wage of an entry-level employee was 8, and the highest wage would have been $150,000 a year. And if you're the highest paid employee and you want a raise, great. The lowest paid employees also get a raise. So at Ben & Jerry's pay structure, there is inequalities. The CEO or the makes a lot more money than just the average kid or college student scooping out ice cream. So there are inequalities. But when the best off gets a raise, it's beneficial to everyone. The worst off benefit as well. It's so Reaganomics. Ronald Reagan famously said that there's trickle down capitalism. If the best off improve their lot in life, then the worst off will improve it. Like the wealth will kind of trickle down to the lowest as well. Most people think that has not been the case. Rawls agrees. This Ben & Jerry's 7-to-1 ratio policy is not trickle-down economics. It's not like a natural, non-conscious, non-intentional thing. Instead, it's a deliberate, intentional structure that they built in. Reagan thought it was just inevitable, but you didn't have to deliberately put that structure in place. Ben & Jerry's actually put that structure in place. So it's not trickle-down economics, but it's got the same effect. When the best off get better off, it literally does improve the situation of the worst off. Okay, so that's their pay structure. Who wouldn't want to work for Ben & Jerry's? All right, so what are these two principles of justice in that Rawls thinks we would agree to? Let's talk about them. We've hinted at them. First principle, each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive total system of equal basic liberties compatible with a similar system of liberty for all. So basically, this is equality of political rights, okay? Voting, participation in the process, free speech, and so on. And it's an equality of that. So he's an egalitarian with political rights. There's no inequalities in that distribution. Second principle, social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged, consistent with the just savings principle, and attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. So there's inequalities in the second principle, but they've got to be fair inequalities. So they have to benefit the least advantaged. The least advantaged can't get screwed. Secondly, there is equality in terms of opportunity. So there isn't necessarily always an equality of outcome, but there's always an equality of opportunity with this second principle. He also has what's called priority rules. So what do you do when you come up with a conflict between, say, economic advantages, material benefits, like increasing your wealth, and then doing so at the expense of a political right, like free speech? What should you do? What should take priority? According to Rawls, liberty should always take priority. The principles of justice are to be ranked in lexical order, and therefore liberty can be restricted only for liberty. And he can think of two cases. So liberty can't be restricted for like economic gain. For one case, a less extensive liberty could strengthen the total system of liberty shared by all, or a less than equal liberty should be acceptable to those with lesser liberty. Okay. Second priority rule. This is the priority of justice over efficiency and welfare. The second principle of justice is lexically prior to the principle of efficiency and to that of maximizing the sum of advantages, and fair opportunity is prior to the difference principle. There are two cases. What does this mean? It means an inequality of opportunity must enhance the opportunities of those of lesser opportunity. So, again, the CEO of Ben & Jerry's gets a raise. It enhances the ice cream scoopers as well. And second, An excessive rate of savings must, on balance, mitigate the burden of those bearing this hardship. So, when there's a new inequality, a new distribution of inequalities, you should do what you can to lessen whatever hardships would be endured by the inequalities, basically, of those who would be affected. Okay, I talked pretty fast. That's basically Rawls' two principles in a nutshell. All right.